Hello and welcome to Premier Study in Investing. It's great to have you. Thanks for stopping by. Hey, welcome back. Today I'm going to be trying to explore the idea for the super bears on Moderna, which is just a total price collapse down into the low teens, somewhere around their cash per share of like 13. You have comments like that. I don't think it's politically viable. I'm going to talk about that as far as Novavax being able to replace essentially Pfizer, Moderna. I know people think about this. We're going to look at it. I always like to say, if you don't like this content, go ahead and give it a thumbs down. Or if you do like it, give it a thumbs up. This just gives me feedback as far as should I continue working on this channel or is this kind of a waste of time? Okay, so Moderna. There's been some interesting information that's come out the last, constantly it seems like this summer. But from RFK, he basically came out and said, as your Secretary of HHS, we are going to cancel $500 million of funding for BARDA in order to do, I think it was 22 R&D projects for mRNA. And essentially the reasons he gave was it can prolong pandemics and also that it's generally ineffective against respiratory illnesses. So then after that, Jay Bhattacharya came out and said something a little bit different about basically public confidence was low. And, well, basically some people will try to spin that to the upside. And I'm going to, I think, pretty easily prove to you that the positive spin on his comments don't go for those. So let's look at what we got. Okay, so I think the primary problem with thinking that the NIH or RFK Jr., Jay Bhattacharya, as much as they may want to, I think we have good reason to believe that they want to cancel these mRNA products until more research can be done, but that may not be physically or politically viable, is sort of because of this. So here, Novavax COVID vaccine for kids, it's not approved for children under 12. So what we basically have for the youngsters is Novavax has the products for anyone that's 12 years and older, is approved for individuals with certain health conditions. So let's say this probably means high risk. Moderna does have the 6 to 11 age group. So, and again, that's just for kids with one or more risk factors, as we've been talking about for many times. And then Pfizer also has the 6 to 4, so right up to age 5. But this is currently under review, and they may lose their emergency use authorization for this age group. So that was another news piece that came out. So let's just imagine that Pfizer does learn that or lose that. What would that mean? Well, typically what has always happened is whatever Pfizer does, Moderna does, right? Pfizer got the first approval, then Moderna got it. And it's just basically been like that the whole way through. If Pfizer gets this removed for children, you still have Moderna covering the entire from 6 months to 11 years. And then Novavax could pick up after that. So I think the case for the super bears, I'm going to call them, as far as the mRNA tech being put on a moratorium, you could see the outrage, right? You could see the people that do believe that these are beneficial, overall net positive for their kids. You're really going to leave them with no option. Do you think as an investor, are you willing to, buy deep out of the money puts and really short this thing like crazy with strike prices down at like 15 or 17.50, or you could even get them as low as $12.50 now. How are you going to get there, right? The only rationale of getting there is to say these are going to be put on a moratorium. These are going to be banned. These are super dangerous. And I know there's a narrative about that. I think there's pretty good information to support that. What I am thinking of is many things, but you at least have RFK Jr. on record saying that these are the most deadly, something like the most deadly vaccines in human history. And then I'll show you, we have some moves. Like this Pfizer vaccine for young kids being called into question. The $500 million BARDA money that was removed. We already talked about that. Anything else? We kind of had this whole mashup over the summer as far as the FDA asking for these companies to pretty please do placebo-controlled trials. And it looks like they're going to have to do placebo-controlled trials for healthy individuals with no risk factors from age 6 months to 65 4 years old. That looks like the game plan. Yeah. So it just doesn't seem viable that, the country is going to just leave. What would that basically be? Kids under 12 without an option, without a vaccine option. Like, there's going to be parents that would be, you can understand, even if you're on the bear side and you think it's like the worst type of tech we've ever seen or something like that, and you're agreeing with RFK Jr. and you're glad that he got elected or appointed, and maybe you voted Republican just in the hopes for Maha and that all this stuff would change and we never have to go through this kind of thing again. Even if you're like that strong on that end, do you really think that the politicians will be able to survive? I mean, the Republicans want to get reelected, right? Like, do you think that they're going to be able to get reelected if they just leave kids from age 0 to age 11 with no option for this? I personally don't think so. Here's, however, what I think Ray Bhattacharya really thinks, but we will look at it in context of this Barron's article. So this Barron's article wants to basically paint this thing in a certain situation that shares were up because basically Moderna stock jumped on the 13th, yeah? As NIH chief tempers administration's attack on mRNA. So they're referring to Jay Bhattacharya, and so what they basically say is, well, as of today, we had like a 5% run up yesterday, and today we've given about half of that back already. So they go through the basics. Shares are down 70% over the last 12 months. RFK Jr. said that they made an announcement that the agency's pandemic preparedness division would stop funding development of mRNA-based vaccines. They also didn't do they basically yanked the funding for that bird flu vaccine grant for Moderna. So we knew about that. We've talked about that for a while. That's not new. They're just kind of writing journalism. So then we get to Dr. Ray Bhattacharya, director of the NIH, argued that HHS was right to stop developing mRNA-based vaccines. And they try to tell us this is why. That Bhattacharya didn't dismiss the technology entirely. Instead, he wrote that the mRNA is like promising technology, quote unquote, and the reason to stop developing mRNA-based vaccines is how the public sees the technology, not in its scientific promise. Okay, well here, this is going to be pretty easy to disprove this part to you, or call into question this interpretation that Barron's has given us. So I said, is Jay Bhattacharya of the NIH a founder of the Hope Accord? And then it says, no, he's not listed. He's a prominent public health official with the NIH. So I said, is Jay a signature of the Hope Accord? Yes, Jay Bhattacharya is a signatory of the Hope Accord. Blah, blah, blah. You can read the rest. And then my next question was, does the Hope Accord call for a moratorium of the mRNA COVID-19 vaccines? Yes, the Hope Accord calls for immediate suspension of mRNA COVID-19 vaccine products. Yeah, that's the first point. That's the first point in the Accord, is that there should be an immediate halt, and these should not be given to the public until further testing is done related to their safety. So you can read all that. Those are the key words. I don't really have much else to say besides the other goal that I had that came to my mind after chatting with somebody in the comment section was, what should we expect as far as Q3 revenue and Q4 revenue? Those targets were dropped, at least on the top end, from the range for this year was 1.5 billion to 2.5 billion. And then very recently, during the last earnings report, they dropped that estimate from the bottom remained the same, 1.5 billion, but I think they dropped it down to 2.2 billion revenue expectation. So a cut of about $300 million. I think it was $200 or $300 million off the top end. So I told someone, well, one thing I should go do is I should go find basically if we have any information out there on the price. So you can do volume times price. And there was this little stock story, AI generated, I think, is all what they do. 5 most interesting questions from analysts. And we had an analyst, Elena Rochelle Marley from UBS, inquire about the U.S. COVID vaccine pricing. Yeah, and she didn't get an answer. CFO James Mock declined to give specifics, but said the pricing and contracting are complete and factored into the current revenue range, which I just spoke about. So Apparently, vaccine uptake is pretty low, so we should expect decreasing volumes. And they're not going to give us the numbers for us to compare SpikeVax to the Mnex Spike, the 1283 product. And so we can't really work there. We don't have enough to really model the cash flows, even if we want to, without that price piece. So we have to go off to some more like generic way to calculate revenue. We could do trend analysis. We could just put some probabilistic model, like some like distribution, like just a normal distribution, maybe over the range that they gave us on revenue from 1.5, like I said, billion to 2.2 billion, and do something like that. Take the middle point, something like that. Try to figure out those cost cuts that they're going to get from those 10,000 people that they are planning on laying off for the rest of the year. So anyways, I always thought this was like a company that was seemingly in trouble, very negative revenue. And if I match that with a economy that I was expecting to go into a recession for the last couple of years, I thought that made Moderna like a really good short. You had the economy working in your favor. You had decreasing uptake, big falls already in share price like we talked about earlier. And it just seemed like everything was kind of working together. But as you know, stock market S&P 500 is pushing 6,500. It's like 64 and some change. So it's really been on a huge rally, about 22% on average for 2024 and 2025. I should say over the last 2 years, it's averaged about like 22%. So it's just been essentially working against us in that sense for those of us that are bulls, or bears, who are bearish. So, okay, that's really about all I have. Is just to say that we don't know the pricing on the 1283 product, which is going to apparently replace the SpikeVax. We have news from RFK Jr. that's negative. We have what some are going to try to spin to us as more of a positive take from Jay Bhattacharya. But truth be told, know that he is a signatory on an accord that calls for the immediate suspension of these products. And you can go back a year ago and find him talking about, doing long form interviews about his views on mRNA technology, on the risk factors, on his concerns. So we really have a lot of data and opinions from these people already. I mean, RFK Jr. wrote a book on the real Anthony Fauci. So we have a lot of information to know what these people really think in their heart of hearts versus what they say as they're now politicians. That's all I have. Thanks so much for joining me. We'll talk to you next time.